Well, I have your risk assessment from before. If you want to
No.
take a look at that real quick, we can
Okay.
move you out of this and look at that. There it is. But then I'm going to go like this,
Yeah, I'm very much in the middle.
and I'm going to do this here and put you up. So when we look at your risk type, now this is a personality assessment that looks at how you approach the idea of risk. So it's got nothing to do with whether you're a risk taker or not. And if you're flying helicopters, you obviously are. But
Hmm.
it's not that you take a risk or not. And as you can see, you're right in the middle, right there in the
Yep.
axis. Now the axial part is not one of the 8 risk types that they have. It's obviously something in the middle, which means exactly what it sounds like. You're kind of a little of everything. And basically what
Yep.
you did when you answered the questions on there, you answered them in such a way that was kind of a little bit of everything. And that's pretty much what they're saying.
Non-committal.
Non-committal, but so far as personality risks are concerned, they are unexpected, are unexceptional and close to the norm. Okay. Now, if you're out towards the edge of something, you are very strongly that risk type, where you are very not
Yep.
strongly any particular risk type. Um,
What is it? What am I like leaning towards? What is that one up there?
Prudent. Up here at the top, you're
Prudent. Okay.
closest to prudent, and we'll come to
Yeah.
that a little bit, because I think there's an important part to realize when somebody is in the axis. That's actually for pilots. In the study that I did, pilots are prudent, deliberate, composed, and axial. Those 4 comprise about 75% of the pilots. I think is where 78% of the
Mm.
pilots when I did the research that I did, which this is where you were in. You were in that research.
Yep.
But those 4 kind of take it, and axial is important because I think that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the upside tendencies of this risk type, the group have a neutral and balanced position in relation to risk, which is good. They are flexibly rather than rigidly committed to any one approach. So that's a kind of a neat skill, because don't you don't necessarily have a specific approach that you go for all the time. Um,
Yeah.
you're pretty flexible. They're not reckless, but not prone to stifling overregulation either. So you're not reckless, but you're also not going, hey, I can't do that because of whatever. You might go someplace in between. Gray areas are not a bad thing for you if you see a value one way or the other. They're risk aware without being likely to overstate dangers or to panic in a crisis. Um, and that's what I was trying to get you to talk a little bit about with the fuel,
Um,
with the fuel going down. It's like,
oh
oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you didn't panic. You just continued on. You kept using what you had and what you were taught to do.
Yeah. It was a very chill cockpit really for the amount of stress that we were under. We're all just kind of like, yeah, we'll make it.
Yeah. uh, well, when you do a lot of flying, like I've been doing the last several years, when you're the only pilot, it's a little bit
Yeah.
more nervous when you're the only one thinking about those things. But you got to kind of do the same thing. Yeah. You're a constructive anchoring force for any team dynamic, which is kind of a neat thing about it also. So you're kind of that mediator. In fact, it says that on the very next
Hmm.
one. You tend to mediate opposing risk. And that's one of the neat things about a team dynamic. When you start looking at personalities, somebody who is that mediator is really key. And you might have found yourself in that role a lot as a company commander or as the
Hmm.
assistant S3. I think at one point you told me about some of the company commanders that would come in there, and you'd calm them down if they were upset with you, and get the job done. I don't know if I,
Yeah.
yeah. So um, now the downside, which there's always a downside. The downside: such individuals are more a facilitator than a source of radical new approaches. So you might not try new things so much as facilitate doing other things better. Flexibility of
That's
this group
accurate.
may sometimes is accurate.
Yeah.
Okay. The flexibility of this group may sometimes come across as inconsistent or indecisive.
Yep, that's accurate too.
That's accurate. Okay. Have you ever been accused of that?
Always,
Making a decision?
constantly.
Okay. Um,
Yep.
I kind of think of. Go ahead. You look like you just thought of
I was,
something.
I was gonna say, yeah, I do have, well, I don't know if you're gonna talk about it later, but I do think that's one thing that one of the reasons why I ended up as axial is because my personality type is one way, but being in the military made me think another way. So they kind of equaled each other out.
We'll come back
So
to
that's
that.
where that,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
No, that's an excellent thought, and I
Because I do have a good example of that too,
okay.
or of that
So we'll
kind
come
of
back to that because
stuff.
you're right. That is what I think is part of, because we cannot separate sometimes um, our personality type from what we are doing at the time that we do the assessment. That is
Hmm.
really hard to do. We try very hard to, when you do the assessments, to do something different, but it turns out that will influence your assessment, what you are doing at that time. So we'll definitely talk more about that because I want to bring that up and we'll come back to that.
Yep.
Some people have the potential to be at odds with any of the 8 risk types. So you can get into an argument with any types of risk about how risk works. Um, Unlikely to be most enthusiastic or passionate in their advocacy of new ventures. You don't necessarily, you don't get excited about things. So that's one of the really neat things about being that axial group. You talked about your neighboring type, prudent. So prudent,
Hmm.
and I'm going to go back to the. So prudence is right here. So this northeast corner. If you think about this as a compass, north, south, east, west, you go to the
Yep.
northeast there. That's prudent. The prudent risk type is what I have noticed is very, very regimented in regulations and laws and FAA regulations and military regulations. They focus on that a lot. And so somebody who is extreme in the prudent area will sit there and quote regulations to you as to why they can't do something. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the military type.
I know those people.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Mhm.
Were you at odds with them?
Sometimes,
Sometimes. Now, the thing is,
especially when they're my boss.
the thing about it is going back to what you were talking about. So at the root of the prudent is a high level of self-control and detailed planning. This type is organized, systematic, and conforming. Conforming is a key part. Conservative and conventional in their approach, such people prefer continuity to variety and are most comfortable operating within established and familiar procedures. Regulations, orders, law, all that stuff is a part of that particular
Yeah.
type. How do they train you in the Army?
Well, by regulation.
Exactly like the prudent risk type.
Yeah.
Exactly what the prudent risk type like. It's basically the military risk type is
Hmm.
pretty much in that. Actually, the way civilians train too, and
Yeah.
and so it's all about making sure you follow the rules, making sure you follow the regulations, making sure you follow orders. That's the way you're trained to fly in the military, and in civilian world the same. As a matter of fact, civilians actually come out more in the prudent area than the military. Military are a little bit further to the south, but still in that area. So now getting back to what you were talking about, before I give you my opinion, go ahead and tell your story that you were talking about where you may
Yeah.
have
So
moved.
I like, by nature, I am more of a conservative thinker as far as like I don't like stepping out of my comfort zone. I don't like doing things that I'm not used to. I hate making phone calls to people that I don't know, even whatever. I'm very much, I don't like that. I don't like confrontation. If something's going to happen that is going to upset somebody, I don't like to do it. So I tend to just avoid it. But in the military, obviously you can't do that because you have to get a job done something's going on, you have to sometimes make waves in order to accomplish a mission or to, get a promotion or, whatever, to have somebody notice you and recognize you. So, well, I guess kind of a couple examples of, as far as, was it talking about the axial tends to be like non-committal or like doesn't, kind of like like may or may not do something, or I forget what other verbiage it used, but that is definitely, I'm very much the like, we could do it this way, we could do it that way, like, yeah, I don't know. Except apparently, when I'm under pressure and like when I'm under that, I would say under stress, but it's the good stress, the stress that kind of gets you thinking more clearly. So in military terms, basically when you're under fire, which I'm very fortunate, I was never actually legitimately under fire at all during my time in Afghanistan. But there's once when I was in ROTC and then once when I was in Afghanistan where I was doing a training exercise where, there was simulated fire and, there was a lot going on and people were yelling and all this stuff was going on. And I basically just had to be like, hey, shut up. This is what we're doing. And so the pilot one that I can think of was actually my pilot in command check ride. It was over like a couple different days where they tested me and everything. And then the very final one, we were just outside our fob and we were doing this situation where we were training these little foothills that were just outside our base. And we were with our sister aircraft and I forget exactly what we were doing at the time. We were just kind of like flying around, do some stuff. And all of a sudden we realized that our sister aircraft was on the ground. Like they legitimately landed on the ground in Afghanistan for a training exercise. But, and so that was the situation was like, hey, your sister ship is no longer flying. Like, what are you going to do? And, because and I basically was like, called into our command post and told them like, hey, we have an aircraft on the ground. I'm going to need some Apache support. Of course, you had to say like, training beforehand so people don't think you're actually in trouble. But so like every call I did, I had to say that before I did it. And they didn't actually tell our battle captain that they were going to be doing this training before we went out and did it. So they were completely confused. They didn't know what to do. But I was being evaluated to be a pilot in command. So I was getting frustrated because they were being very non-committal and it was like, hey, my sister ship is on the ground, like they're in trouble. I can't remember if they were simulated being shot at or not, but basically got to the point where I just got on the radio and I was like, if you don't let me go down there and pick them up, like I forget what I said, but they basically like gave me permission to land in order to pick them up or something. I forget. That was a long time ago, but pretty much I was put in that situation where I had to make a decision and I basically came back and told them, I'm going to do this and you're going to be okay with it. And because that's what our crew members needed in order to survive in that situation that was going on. But I remember like I was so nervous the entire time because I always questioned myself and whether or not I'm making decisions. But after the flight and everything, everybody on the crew said that they were very impressed with the way that I handled it because they weren't used to seeing me act that way. Because they're used to seeing the, oh, well, you could do this, you could do that. And that's essentially what led to me making pilot in command was because I showed that when put under pressure and when put in a situation that, where lives could be in danger, I will make a decision and because that's what's the right thing to do. Kind of similar thing kind of when I was in ROTC, but it was a little bit different where we were doing a sticks exercise, just squad training exercise. And long story short, everything was going great So of course the instructor kept throwing more things at me. So he killed off our two ginormous, like 200+ pound people in our squad and made us, evac them, did simulator mortar fire. So we were coming under fire and everything. And basically just the whole time kept more stuff to it to see how it would react. And it was just, every time I was just like, you do this, you do that, you do this, and get out of here. So that was a very long story again, but yeah. If that made sense.
It does. So here's okay. Let me boil this all down to psychology here for a minute.
Okay.
And I'm not a psychologist, so it's not going to be quite. It may not be quite correct. So going back to your compass here. So you're in the middle here. Basically, you were working on this side over here, being very deliberate most of the time, being very prudent, very structured. And when did you take this? While you were a company commander? Is that when you did, or maybe when you were staff, when you were assistant S3, I think. But you're up at Drum, I think, if I remember right.
Yeah. Was that when I was in Germany that I did it? It might have been before
Could
Germany.
be just before
I can't
Germany,
remember.
but I remember
Yeah.
you took this and you were in the staff position. So you were very much about the regulations, very much about doing things the correct way because you were correcting people, making sure. And so I agree. I believe that your true inner personality is over here someplace on the west side of the compass. This is more the emotional side. This is more of the, you get more cognitive down here, get a little bit more emotional up in this area. And that would equate very much to your personality type that we've done before with the Myers-Briggs type indicator that I know I've done with you. That would agree with you. And so I'm kind of the same thing. I'm very close to the axis, but that's because I too am kind of on this side of the compass. And yet, because of what we did for a living and what we do for a living, we are forced to be much more regulated, much more about the things that we were and were not able to do legally, and all the other things over here that make this much more about following rules. And so when we took this, both of us kind of slid this way, and that's the reason, and because it's me too, that I've kind of felt that I kind of slide that way. So you're very comfortable in that regulated world, but it's not necessarily what's natural for you.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is what's natural. It comes out most of the time. You're very much people oriented. People like you because you're easygoing. You're pretty calm. But when you get pushed, it's shut up, sit down, and do what you're told because we don't have another option. So you're willing to make those decisions, and again, that tends to be from the other side. And so in the research that I did, what we found out of the 57 or so pilots that I have in my research project, we have 0 pilots who are carefree. Now, for the psychology guys that I was working with, the people that developed this assessment were actually doing all the number crunching and all the psychometrics and all that, and they were the ones working with me and helping me put my research together. That was interesting to them, that the pilots didn't fall. It didn't surprise me. I believe there are plenty of carefree pilots who just by training have pushed themselves this way a lot more. And that's the reason why we have a large number of axial pilots in my research, as one of the larger of the fourth largest group in that area. Actually, maybe it's the second largest group, but whatever. It's part of that big pilot clump, much more so on the right hand side. But I think that's because it dragged a lot of us other type of pilots over there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Have you done this assessment as far as like pilots versus crew members?
Yeah. Well, medical crew members, not necessarily crew chiefs or mechanics. I would like to do more.
That would be a whole other group of people.
Yes, I think so. For the medical crew members, they're pretty close. I mean, they're a little bit more to the right-hand side than the general population. So the general population they got is about 12,000 people that they have done this for, or maybe up to 14,000 now. I can't remember. And the general population puts them all at about roughly between about 9 and 12%. So they're all pretty evenly spaced out around the entire compass. The
Okay.
medical folks do have a heavier group over on the right hand side again, because what are they doing? They're following protocols. They're following very specific ways of dealing with patients and adding, and how much kind of drugs and medications they take and all the rules for that. So they're pretty much on that same side, except there's a lot of them over here too. So they do have a much more spread out group. So yeah, I actually had about 55 helicopter medical crew members, and so they kind of follow along the same lines. That
Yeah, I'm just curious because while you're talking, you kind of reminded me of a conversation I had with my first sergeant when I was a commander, because he was a maintainer by trade. I think he was a 60 maintainer. I can't remember exactly. So
okay.
and then became a first sergeant, so he wasn't working on aircraft at the time. But I had a conversation with him once about one of the reasons why he never wanted to be a company commander was because he didn't want to be the one who made the final decision. And I came back at him and said that, like, well, I don't ever want to be a first sergeant because I don't want to come up with ideas. So we figured, we learned that we worked great as a team because he came up with all kinds of ideas. He had the experience, he had the knowledge, and I would just sit there and listen and be like, okay, go with this one. And he's like, okay, cool. Because he didn't want to be that person who came up with, who just decided this is what we're going to do. And so I don't know if that's like a risk thing, but it's definitely a personality type kind of thing. And so it'd be interesting to see how that, whether it's the personality that drives the job or the job that drives the personality when it comes to things like that.
Yeah,
So.
that is an interesting part of it. That's the way life is, and it's not just in the military, although that's obviously a risk of the job. Hey, thanks very much, Hannah. I appreciate your time on this.
Yep.
We'll see where this comes out.